Okay. It's gonna take a minute here and add some people to the meeting. In theory. There we go. Chief. Deputy Chief. I think Jimmy's going to be not too far behind. So I'll get started as we're doing this. That's okay. So welcome to the Kingston Police Services Board meeting number 2122. Dated November 18th, 2021. Looking at the agenda here, can I get a disclosure of conflict of interest? Okay. And can I get approval of the agenda? Thank you. Jeff, Christian, thank you. All in favor? Good. And if I can get adoption of the minutes from the meeting 2119, which was held October 21st, 2021, and the special meeting 2120 held on November 4th, 2020. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Christian. All in favor? Very good. Thank you. And then we'll step into the communications. First is going to be the Public Safety Division memorandum. Some of these are dated, but just because we have a monthly meeting. So who would like to speak to that? Deputy Chief or Chief?
We'll be splitting them. So I'll do the first five and Scott will do the rest
Sure.
of them. So this particular memo was dated October 15th, and it's regarding the requirement of proof of vaccination in certain settings. So on September the 22nd, patrons of certain businesses were required to provide at the point of entry proof of vaccination and proof of being fully vaccinated before entering. And those businesses were responsible for reviewing and confirming the ID and vaccination status. And it was particularly noted here that this requirement to show ID and vaccination status does not apply to law enforcement for the purpose of entering these businesses while exercising their lawful duties. There was also a reminder there that the Directive 6, which was issued by the Chief Medical Officer of Health on August the 17th for hospitals and service providers with the Home Care and Community Services Act, also was there, but this directive again does not apply to visitors, patients, or their supports, including law enforcement who may accompany or escort a patient or enter a facility while exercising their law enforcement duties. So it just does highlighted the fact of the exemption for police officers.
Okay, thank you. So Lori, Jimmy's having a hard time. Can you send him an invite to this meeting, please?
Of course.
Thank you. Next would be the plan to safely reopen Ontario and manage COVID-19 for the long term.
Yes, and again, this says beginning October 25th. There was a removal of the capacity limit restrictions on physical distancing requirements in most settings where proof of vaccinations were required. And it permits the removal of the capacity limits on certain indoor settings where no proof of vaccinations were currently in place. So if the business now requires patrons to provide proof of vaccination on entry. So the capacity limits still apply for certain settings, such as bathhouses, sex clubs, strip clubs, and food and drink establishments that have dance facilities. And the phased approach is going to be guided by the ongoing assessments of key public health indicators.
Okay, very good. And there's an incident command training.
Yes, so item number 3 was dated October 27th. And it indicates that there's a new series of incident command courses that are being offered at the Ontario Police College, and they were developed in partnership with the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police. And these basic Command 100 components are now being incorporated into the basic constable training course for the new recruits, and it prepares them to assess and plan for immediate action interventions and de-escalations, gets them into the language of the incident command. The Incident Command 200 level is for patrol sergeants and senior police supervisors and builds on that Incident Command 100. And then there's an Incident Command 300 course that prepares duty officers who assume command in critical incidents until they're relieved.
Okay, good. May I ask you to speak to the rules for areas at step 3 and the roadmap exit step?
So this was an update that was effective starting October the 27th, in that there is a removal of the 100-person outdoor limit on organized public events, allowing for Remembrance Day ceremonies and holiday parades and other outdoor events, providing that there's compliance with social distancing and mask covering. Indoor public events require masks if people are unable to maintain at least 2 meters distance from each other outside of their household. And the general capacity limit is the number of people who could actually maintain that social distancing. There were a number of other clarifications that were mentioned, such as reservations required for concerts and movies and performances, etc., that were also mentioned in this.
Okay. Very good. Now, if we could talk about this secondment opportunity with the major case management program at the Ontario Police College.
So this is a secondment opportunity for members of police agencies. So the Ontario Police College is seeking persons to assist with the delivery of this power case for managing investigations and for the command triangle courses. So the closing date for applications is November 12th.
Okay. And then if we could talk about the crisis negotiator course.
Certainly. So this is a new course offered by the Ontario Police College in crisis negotiation. Essentially, crisis negotiations open to our emergency response team or members who are assigned to a crisis negotiations assignment or crisis negotiators. It was developed, and I guess the big key with this is it's new. It was developed using subject matter experts from around the province. And they're going to be delivering a pilot project or a pilot course in this in early 2022. And this was dated November 1st, 2021.
Okay. Cool. And then we have the basic constable training program allocation request for January 12th through April 7th, 2022.
Certainly, so dated December 8th, 2021, November 2nd, 2021, the police college just notifying all police services should they request a seat. We have to notify them prior to November 12th, which obviously is already passed. And once they receive all the allocations, they make decisions as to who's going to get the seats at the police college. So we'll certainly continue our conversations with the Ontario Police College regarding basic constable training.
Okay. Any questions from the board at this point? No? Okay. Forms under the Provincial Offences Act to introduce temporary inserts.
So essentially the ministry is just notifying us they use a specific printer when they're printing out Part 1 summonses and any inserts or things that go along with those. They're making notification here that unfortunately the printer they're using is unable to meet the deadline. So essentially, all of these documents expire November 1st, or expired November 1st of 2021. So they're just granting an extension of the current documents till the new ones can be printed. And there is an insert that goes along with them, which essentially is a document that notifies any person who receives a Part 1 summons. It's information relating to early resolution court. So just some information about if they want to resolve their matter early. So the courts are required to print those and give them to enforcement, and our court section looks after ensuring they're disseminated to our staff until the new Part 1 summonses are printed, which we expect will be done early in the new year.
This one's from the Ministry of the Attorney General. So the amendment of Regulation 108/11 forms under the Provincial Offences Act, POA, to introduce temporary inserts.
Yep. That was the one. Yeah, I just discussed there
Same
with
thing. Yeah.
copies. Yep.
And then about the booster dose of the COVID-19 vaccine.
Yes, so certainly we're just being notified that there is a process in place for a booster dose to be administered to people who are eligible for the booster dose. They have to have, it has to have been 6 months since their last COVID-19 vaccine. And essentially you've got to be 70 years or older, a healthcare worker or a designated essential caregiver. And currently people who've received 2 doses of AstraZeneca or 1 dose of Johnson & Johnson are going to be entitled to a booster. And also First Nations, Inuit, Métis adults and their non-Indigenous household members. And it's just important to note here that healthcare workers do include police and special constables who are providing medical first response as part of their duties. So anyone who falls under that category is eligible now for a booster under the COVID-19 vaccine.
Okay. Okay. So, and then about the community and safety policing grant.
Yes, and this came from the government with respect to notifying us of the application process for the community safety and policing grants for the local funding and for the provincial streams. And so we're certainly looking at the applications now to develop some plans in place. The due date is January 6th for 2022. And the provincial streams have to follow are focused on one or more of the following: guns and gangs related violence, sexual violence and harassment, human trafficking, mental health and addictions, and hate motivated crime. So those are some of the categories that we have to comply with when making the applications.
Okay. Any questions? No questions? Okay, then we have letters from the CAPG. One is the conference committee thanking us for our contribution for the 2021. There's also an email from the CAPG regarding the governance summit. And that's on the November 24th. And then there's an email from the CAPG with the summary report with respect to the police governance regime in Canada. We're good. And then there's the Ontario Association of the Police Boards. This is Zone 2. There was the minutes of the meeting with the OAP PSB Zone 2 held in September 17th. There's also an email requesting RSV attendees for November 26th. And there's an email for October 27th, dated October 27th, attached on the postings for the executive director of the Ontario Association of Police Services Board. And then there was just a members update for the Zone 2 meeting. Okay, and then so we have hold on here. We have addendum, and that's an email November 15th for the Zone 2 meeting as well, as a reminder of the November 26th. And then we have from the Human Rights Commission on the COVID-19 recovery planning. Do you want to speak to that? Anyone?
Yeah, I mean, this is a document that has been a statement or policy statement that is put out through the Ontario Human Rights Commission. And it's really designed to better understand and address the systemic challenges that have been coming to light and defined in this moment of history in terms of the pandemic. So it really introduces 6 principles for COVID-19 recovery and potential policy and program actions that are consistent with a human rights-based approach upon the recovery. So when you read through it, it will outline steps that include many different areas within the recovery process, but it also bears in mind something to do with custody and overcrowding and being mindful in facilities of how to overcome crowding and to use discretionary release legal or policy provisions during the pandemic period. And that specifically talks about policing, but it also talks about other areas in health and education, etc.
Okay, thanks. There's no delegations. There's addendum to reports, and I think Matt Funnel is going to give us a presentation on the report for 2021 Queen's Homecoming Deployment. Matt, if you could join us.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. You hear me okay?
Yeah, we do.
Thank you. So yeah, I did file the report for your review. I'll just hit some of the highlights if that's fine, and I'll obviously ask any questions that you may have. So basically, as you know, each year we commence planning for some large street parties and gatherings related to the Queen's Homecoming. So what made this year unique was, of course, last year in 2020, the school was operating primarily virtually, and with that, we didn't see a huge influx of students enrolled, nor did we find the large street gatherings. But with 2021, the difference was the school did return to mostly in person, and with that brought a full enrollment of around 20,000 students. The unique part for us this year was that, as I mentioned in the report, was that left us with 2 cohorts of students who had not yet had the opportunity to engage in this what has now become fairly ingrained street party activity. So we were faced with having to plan for, in essence, 2 years of students who would want to engage in this behavior. So there was a lot of talk over the year whether we would face 1 or 2 homecoming weekends, but it was eventually settled that there was the one official weekend from the October 15th and the 17th, and that would be virtual. So basically, we knew going into this as we did our plan that we're faced with one designated weekend. So to give a bit of background, our planning was well underway prior to this, but as school year opened, what happened was there was a staggered enrollment of the first year students. So what happened over about a 4 or 5 day period, about 1,000 students arrive each day to arrive into residence. Problem associated with that is there weren't a lot of activities that we've seen in the past for them to do. So as they came to town, they really were left idle with not a whole lot to do, and they of course hit the streets and partied a great deal. In addition to that, we had all the off campus, all the upper years were moving back and into the community residence as well. So we were at full enrollment fairly quickly, or at least full occupancy from a residency point of view, and basically had a couple of weeks worth of problems to deal with. So basically over that first week, we were inundated with about 2,500 to 5,000 students took over University, Johnson and Earl at one point. Actually, on multiple occasions that happened. Then on September 2nd, another 1,000 students spilled over onto University, forcing us to close Johnson Street. Officers reported that they were being pelted with bottles, and students would run away from police when they tried to conduct enforcement, those types of things. Students damaged cruisers when a student tried to stab out a tire with a knife. and another officer was assaulted with a student running up behind him trying to put a bag over his head. So it was a level of defiance and violence that we had not really seen this early on and so sustained. So basically, as we entered into the second week, we realized that we had to come up with maybe a strategic enforcement plan. And part of that process, the city implemented the aggravated nuisance party bylaw, which added some teeth to the existing nuisance party bylaw, and that it was tied to the limits of the Reopen Ontario Act. So what it did is gave us very, very timely enforcement options when the street parties were tied to the numbers that were tied to the ROA. We were able to do on the spot enforcement. That's where the much publicized $2,000 ant came from there. So, but the issue, I mean, we enforced a lot. We had lots of charges, but it really didn't have a dampening effect. We found that just defiance and all, whether it be the gatherings, the criminal code, the Liquor License Act, mischief, there was lots of criminal code offenses. We found that it was just a much more volatile crowd this year. So basically as we were planning through this and we saw that happening, what the decision was made that we would upstaff every Thursday, Friday, Saturday night for all of September and October. So of course that caused considerable strain in our resources going through that. So like I mentioned that the virtual homecoming, again, homecoming was virtual. It was planned for the 15th and 16th, but we were also learning that the students were planning for an additional back-to-back weekend on the 22nd and 23rd. They were going to basically attempt to do a silent takeover of the street and in essence have a second unsanctioned homecoming party. So we were following intelligence. We were trying to get our planning process together for that. We were learning that also because our homecoming fell so further beyond others across the province, that students were planning to come in Kingston for that week and from other jurisdictions. So again, from the onset of the planning, which we were well underway several weeks in advance, and up to the move-in, the gatherings, we were also faced with some online influencer named Jack Denmo, who was encouraging online behavior to rally people, get them to come to Kingston and make Kingston the best ever homecoming among all the homecomings. So there was that challenge. There were other online challenges issued from our student population for others to gather and come and make this make the best ever. So basically, as we gathered our intelligence, we were talking with the students locally, we were following all this information that made us realize fairly quickly that we were going to have a problem back-to-back weekends to deal with. So with that, as years pass, we always, as you know, we always activate the incident command structure to this large-scale event. And with that, we also brought in neighboring services to help us. So Brockville, Gananoque, Smiths Falls, sent officers and special constables over the time to help us. So a quick rundown of the first weekend. So Friday, October 15th, we had 81 members of our department deployed. That includes all of our civilians as well as our sworn staff and all of our command staff. We had 108 members of the OPP Provincial Public Order Unit with us, as well as with them came drone capabilities as well as the long-range acoustic device capabilities. And what that allows us to do is talk to the crowd in large numbers and give instructions, and that came in very valuable when we were talking later on about when we declared street parties and nuisance parties. So Friday, the first Friday was fairly quiet, more quiet than years past, but the Saturday, the 16th of October was very concerning. We had very large, rebellious, confrontational, assaultive crowds. On the Saturday, they basically took over Aberdeen Street, and that was orchestrated through basically the students started to gather, but there was also a mass chat sent out over several different chat groups, and that was coordinated. And basically we were inundated with a number of thousands of students at once. And in essence, we estimate students were gathered on Aberdeen Street. So that caused us some difficulty, of course. But on Saturday, we had about 93 of our personnel deployed. And again, the 108 member of the OP Public Order Unit, 31 members from Durham Regional Police were there to assist us as well. Again, we found that the crowd was very confrontational. We were assaulted, pelted with bottles, full beer cans and beverage cans, as well as other debris were thrown at the police. So eventually, through some very patient deployment of those resources and just a very, I think, well thought out and basically patient deployment, we were able to push that crowd and basically get it off Aberdeen Street without any major incident, other than we did have one officer sustain an injury during an arrest at that time, and they're off now and they're recovering. They are still on paid duty, or sorry, on the light duties until they return to full duty. Later on in the evening, another 3,000 to 3,500 people gathered in Victoria Park. Again, we tried to basically monitor that situation, and then we pushed that crowd at the right time, trying to get it out of the park, not to cause any further problems. The issue there was, though, that we did have a stranger on stranger stabbing occur during that gathering. So again, we saw unprecedented violence that we hadn't seen before. I think I get to it later on, but as you know, we also had the double homicide occur on that weekend. So we were pretty busy that weekend overall. So back to the enforcement on that Friday and Saturday, the first weekend, total of 36 people were arrested, 8 criminal code charges were laid, 34 liquor offenses, open liquor offenses, 16 public intoxication and 2 Highway Traffic Act offenses, 3 obstruct police amps laid, 15 aggravated nuisance parties, 10 amplification of noise, and 1 for yelling. Keep in mind, those are just the police numbers, and they don't include the citywide bylaw numbers as well. Those are just the numbers that we were able to lay that night. So again, I mentioned, I guess it's in this next paragraph of the report that the homicide occurred, but we had the 8,000 people gather on that Saturday of the first weekend. And we found that there was a very concerning dynamic in that crowd, where we found there was a dynamic in that crowd we hadn't dealt with. We found people there that would prey on vulnerable people. Over the weekend, just the days leading up to that, a sex offender had been arrested down in that area, a known sex offender to us. There was also some drug activity down there. So there was really a dynamic in that crowd that we hadn't seen before that elevated our concern for the level of violence that we might incur. So on to the second weekend. Again, the Friday night was relatively calm, like the first weekend, which is unusual for homecomings. Typically Fridays and Saturdays are busy, but on these both weekends, Fridays were somewhat subdued. Our incident command structure was in place again. On the Friday night, sorry, I'll go to there. We had 89 of our staff deployed. 108 member of the OPP public order were here, 40 from York Police this weekend, 63 members of the public order unit, including the mounted unit, the horse mounted unit from Toronto Police Service was here to help us. Saturday was much like the Saturday before. However, the crowds didn't gather in large numbers in one grouping. We were able to keep them dispersed and keep them not able to gather and take a street, but they were still out in similar numbers. But I credit that to the way we had our resources deployed and the amount of outside help that we actually had with our public order unit and our mounted. So basically, again, we had 61 of our people out on that Saturday, 108 of the OPP, 63 from Toronto and public mounted, 31 from Durham, 40 from York. We also had the Toronto Cyber Intelligence Unit here who helped us monitor online behavior, which was very, very, very helpful in deployment of our resources, knowing what the crowd was up to and what they were talking about. I think I've already talked about the Saturday, but we had another officer actually injured on the second Saturday, making an arrest. Unfortunately, that officer was not seriously injured and there was no time lost there. But stats for that second weekend, 14 people were arrested, 2 criminal code charges were laid, 77 open liquor, 9 underage drinking, 5 for public intoxication, 2 trespass to property act charges, and 4 highway traffic act. Again, back to the AMP penalties. 29 aggravated nuisance parties, 25 amplification of noise, 4 for obstructing police, and 2 for yelling. So I just wanted to give a bit of a wrap up. So like I said, our planning was underway for several weeks in advance of the actual homecoming weekends. And then as we planned for the homecoming aspect of this, we started to experience what we saw, as I mentioned, with the move-in and how the momentum of this year seemed to be different than years past, and that we really saw behavior from this crowd that we hadn't seen over such a long period of time. Homecomings past, we've certainly encountered aggressive and assaultive behavior, but this was a prolonged thing this year where it seemed to happen right out of the gate and continued on, which of course caused us concern as the momentum built for both of these weekends. So that's why we convened meetings early on in our planning with our public order unit friends across the province, mostly from the GTA, to discuss what we were learning, how our intelligence was being built, and what we were planning to assist us in determining just the level of police response that we needed to manage what we saw coming. And of course, we had the benefit of information from other police departments who had dealt with homecomings that had already happened. And with the concern that ours was being billed, or at least attempted to be the best of all, there was a lot of things, as you know, from media coverage that gone on around the province, and we were concerned what we were going to be faced with. So we did have considerable resources here. I think they were effectively deployed. I think they were all required. And I think that given what we dealt with, we came out of this fairly successfully from an injury and a crowd management point of view, even though like years past, we have this huge inconvenience of how this population behaves. But at the end of the day, I think that as we've debriefed this, I think that we've declared it a success from a police operation point of view, and that we certainly have, I think we need to be concerned how we're going to face St. Patrick's Day and then homecoming next year based on the fact that these students seem to be, or these people seem to be trying to set a stage here. So Chief McNeely and Deputy Fraser were here both of those weekends from morning and noon and night with all of us here. And either of you may have something to offer. I don't know if I missed anything, if you want to add anything further for the board, and I can also take any questions that you may have.
I think Christian has a question.
Great.
Inspector Fennell, thank you for that report that paints a deeply disturbing picture. I was hoping that both qualitatively and quantitatively, you might be able to give us a sense of the trends over recent years, because there's probably some trends where you saw an increase, there's probably some trends where you see an aberration. So trying to get a sense of how this picture has shifted and what that means both for the strategic and the operational posture of police and other municipal and provincial organizations in anticipating and preparing what you laid out at the end of your report.
Okay, I do apologize. I don't have specific data from years past. I can give you anecdotal and my own observations about what the temperature of the crowd. And I mean, we are moving forward. We are part of a provincial unsanctioned gatherings. It's a subcommittee of the OACP that we sit on. Myself and Deputy Fraser sit on it. So we are with our partners across the province. We are monitoring that very thing to see try to come up with some trends and what other communities are doing to try to quell this problem. But anecdotally, I can tell you that I think what we saw on the Saturday of the first weekend, the 8,000 gathering, is very similar we've seen in the past. Over the years, we've seen it considerably more than that, and we've seen it considerably less. But I think the fact that we can count on a number of very similar to that gathering, and that's been fairly consistent in my time here, the 20 years that I've been here with Kingston. So I think that's fairly consistent. I think what's very different and very concerning this year is the dynamic of that crowd and the behavior that we saw. So whether we can consider this an anomaly, that it is in essence what I talked about, that is two cohorts getting their first opportunity to experience what has become this very disturbing, it's almost like it's a well-established thing in Kingston in other communities as well to engage in these large unsanctioned street parties. So whether this year is a bit of an anomaly coming out of COVID, I think it might end up being an outlier from that sense because of the momentum that grew from the 1st of September and also the fact that there was two back weekends of partying. So I think we're going to have to wait for years in the future to see whether that becomes a trend. But again, I think the biggest concern for me, having been involved in several of these, both on the ground from working there and being part of the planning or being part of incident command, was the level of violence from the crowd, both before and after the other uptick in gun violence we had in back-to-back weekends was concerning. Obviously, we had a shooting on the first night. The second night, as you know, the two victims that were shot to death on the Friday or the Saturday, sorry, were actually, we have information they were in this crowd. So how they're connected to the whole thing is still premature. The investigation's ongoing, but the bottom line is they were there and this potential for violence was there. So I take your point, sir. I can't offer you specific stats at the moment on that, but I think some of it's going to be just observations from year to year. We can certainly track charges and arrests. What's difficult to track quantitatively is, of course, the level of violence just through that doesn't end up in charges. It's behavior-based. So I think we can, with our group, with our partners across the province, we're trying to monitor and see the trend that way. I don't know if that answers your question, sir, but we are trying to plan for the future.
So Inspector Funnell, so there's two elements that, yeah, the not everything that's measurable matters, and not everything that matters is measurable. So this is why I think, especially when it comes to these situations, I appreciate both your qualitative and your quantitative assessment. As time and resources permit, and insofar as the chief approves, I think it would be interesting for the board to understand more about the specific trends in Kingston over the years, and also the extent to which the trend in Kingston reflects a broader trend across the province, or so to what extent Kingston is an outlier, and to what extent sort of Kingston maps on to what we see elsewhere. The context for my question is, of course, now I realize this is not the G20, but any board member who's read the Morden report can be left in no doubt that the Toronto Police Services Board at the time failed in doing its due diligence in asking the right questions and seeking systematic responses from their service. And so this is simply an effort on my part, and hopefully with the support of my colleagues, to make sure that the board is actively engaged with you on the operational level and with the chief on the strategic level, to ensure that we have a full understanding of the trends, we have a full understanding of the posture, and that the board can play an appropriate challenge function in the very difficult work that you're confronted with here.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. And obviously there's a whole dynamic of this exchange you're talking about that belongs between you and the chief. But I will say I appreciate what you're saying from a larger outlook of this. I think it's safe to say, I think we would all agree, we certainly have issues to face in the future, because we in Kingston now, from our trends, we do know we're facing issues on St. Patrick's Day and on homecoming weekend or weekends, however that plays itself out. So I don't disagree that on a larger scale, we need to look forward in our planning and how we will approach these, and how we can set ourselves up as an organization to handle these large unsanctioned gatherings, whether they be part of homecoming or other events that might occur in the COVID world. As you know, we're faced with more and more protests and all of that dynamic. We're faced with a new aspect of that as well. So on the higher level, yes, I agree. We do need to ensure that our planning is in step, and that we are following trends, and we know how to ourselves to deal with these sort of situations. Kingston's far too small, I think, I don't know if we would ever have any type of a unit that would assist with this, but when we see these large gatherings of 8, 10, 12,000 people, we simply need the outside resources with that extra training to come in. So that would be part of our long-range operational planning to ensure those resources are available to us. But of course, it's higher level planning each year, and of course, higher level discussions that would occur with you and the chief.
Thank you, Inspector. No further questions.
Thank you, Matt, for taking the time and presenting that for us. It happens every year. And so is there a committee, Chief, that, not that you're going to change the street party, but is there a committee that is working on this?
Absolutely. We have a committee that really starts debriefing the year after the last homecoming, and we sort of debrief what happened, what worked well, what didn't work, how can we improve. Again, we had a debriefing of our community partners as well as our police partners over this past 2 homecomings. So we've Inspector Funnell has held that debriefing, and Deputy Chief and myself have been part of listening to some of those the feedbacks. So we start early on developing and looking at the trends ahead of us. And we started early even in this year when we saw what was happening with the move-ins. We were also monitoring the trends at all the different universities and what was happening in their homecomings. Ours was the last one, of course, out of all the university homecomings. And so we knew that added pressure was coming our way because of that. We did a lot of intelligence gathering, throughout that time period to enhance our knowledge as to what we were preparing for, which is why we engaged very early on with the Ontario Provincial Police Public Order Unit and strategized with them and subject matter experts in terms of numbers that we were going to help deploy on those 2 weekends. So it was very much gathering the information, based on past trends that we've seen and based on what we were noticing and moving forward. And part of that large gatherings, mass gatherings, hearings committee that Inspector Funnell was part of, and that Deputy Chief Fraser joined later on when he became part of the Kingston Police, is again talking about the best practices and what happened and what worked. You know, we've got those influencers and those YouTube influencers that were really egging on and having the rivalries between the two universities and trying to make the Kingston homecoming the biggest homecoming party that there was, you know, and that second weekend we were impacted by that. I mean, that influencer was there on those occasions, and so that doesn't help either when you have that. And we were monitoring that very much so with cyber units that were helping with us. So a lot does go into that, and a lot is going into that now for the future, not only as Matt had said for St. Patrick's Day, but again for the next move-in and then the next homecoming. So we're actively communicating throughout the year with our partners on this as well. But I appreciate it. It's very important that that the understanding is there for you.
For sure. And is there a cost to all this yet, or are you still waiting on things coming?
Correct. We're still waiting for, it's premature to put the entire cost yet here. We're still waiting for some of our partners to bring in the costs for us. So if that's okay, it'll come in the next board meeting.
Okay.
For the totality. But as I say, we are working with the Queens and the cost recovery through the revenues that were generated from those that have violated the laws and rules of the area. So again, we're working together on that and monitoring things.
Okay, understandably.
And summarize the human cost in that as well, Chief. Again, for the public, I think it's important to understand the injuries sustained by officers. I find that completely unacceptable.
100%, you know, and it's the physical injuries, but it's also the mental injuries, the fatigue that goes along with that as well, because, you know, that was, as I mentioned, all of September and all of October, Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights, lots of overtime that was happening throughout those 2 months. And then to be, you know, sustain, you know, verbal abuse, but also other, you know, unsettling things that were happening in the crowds that we saw. All of that plays a toll on people and exacerbates the situation on our members and their mental health as well. So we're cognizant of that. And I thank you for bringing that up. It's important to note.
Very good. Okay. Jimmy, you have a question?
Thank you, Inspector Funnell, for your report. My question is, we heard over the media, and now, as you mentioned, there was 2 officers was injured. How often that happened in the past, and how we've been handling that? Also, is there any assessment for the public damage beside whatever is the damage to the city property or the Queen's property or to the police mentally or physically? Was any assessment that how much damage was done by this party to the public, to the neighbors and other people?
I can't answer the question accurately, sir. Just I know that obviously with the 3,000 to 3,500 people gathering in Victoria Park, I can assume that there would have been some property damage there just to the environment, if nothing else, and in the structures that are there. I don't have those numbers. We would investigate any reports that are brought to us, especially either from that perspective, as well as any neighbors in the university district, anybody that would have had sustained property damage. I don't think we've received a number of reports of property damage or related criminal investigations, other than the fact that there were a number of street signs, as you know, were stolen and from the area. So those investigations, charges were actually laid in a couple of occasions with street signs being stolen. So I don't have accurate information as far as of a value of damage or that as far as any investigations going. I don't think we were overridden with a number of reports. Back to the officer injuries, it's kind of an ebb and flow thing. One of the injuries this year was more serious than the other, not life-threatening, but certainly took an officer out of duty for a while. The other one was kind of bumps and scrapes and bruises, getting into a physical altercation, making an arrest. We do experience those types of injuries frequently in large gatherings. If you're making arrests, people fight back, they're drinking, they're under influence. So that kind of thing we've found, you know, you have the scrapes and bruises. So that's, as a whole, not unusual. I would suggest to have an officer taken out of duty for a lengthy period of time is somewhat unusual in the grand scheme of things, but nonetheless, I appreciate the comment both of you and others have made about the injuries to officers, that it's concerning to us. And adding to that, the level of violence that we were anticipating in this crowd, and with the uptick in gun violence in our community, and now with the connection to this crowd, at the very least with the victims of this homicide, that brings another very, very difficult dynamic for the police who are out there trying to police this crowd, because not that you ever let your guard down, but when you're out there, years past, you're out there literally with a number of 17, 18, 19, and 20-year-old students who are simply wanting to party on the street and drink and perhaps use drugs. That's a different dynamic of crowd to manage and deal with than ones that come with guns and knives and want to have, have that level of violence on the street. You see that in Toronto and caravan examples and things like that. So it brings a totally different dynamic to how you police that crowd and what you're dealing with. So these are very big concerns. We'll have to, like I said, monitor this as we move forward and see what the trends tell us. But it's hard to without qualitative information.
Well, it's no doubt about it. And I think all my colleagues and every Kingstonian, we feel sorry for that injuries. All of you working hard to provide us safety. And so you was there on the homecoming as well. It's very unacceptable. And I think no one is agreed to that the student should attack on the police or throwing things on it. It's very unacceptable, uncivilized. Also, being here in Kingston from last 18 years and being a small business person, having a restaurant, we always get prepared ourselves for the homecoming. I have a restaurant in some part of the Queens I'm covering to deliver. And we always worried and we always think about the homecoming. So what we have to prepare. Last 18 years, I have heard the similar situation and stories that that's been done, that's been damaged, and they're getting over control every year. And I'm sure Chief and the police force in Kingston also every year try to get well prepared. But what is the difference was this year, which I overheard from some sources and some community members, there was a lot of drug and illegal drug and weapon was poured into Kingston, especially at this homecoming. How truthful is it? And what you think as an officer being in the force for many, many years, that where we have the weaknesses where we cannot control, or this crowd every year go above and beyond what we was prepared for?
Well, I think to answer your question, part of the with this crowd this year in particular, I think we need to go back a bit, I think, across this entire year and even beyond 2021, that in the last number of months, in the last year and a half to 2 years, we've seen a very marked increase in gun violence hit our streets. As you've read in a number of cases we've had, both from a murder point of view, attempted murder, and just out and out assaults with weapons and so on. So the bottom line is, where there's guns, there's drugs, where there's drugs, there's guns, or drugs, there's guns, and guns, there's drugs, that they come hand in hand. You have basically, if you're you're the vendor in this situation, you have 8,000 people gathered in one opportunity. I mean, it's a market-rich environment, I should say, where you can infiltrate that crowd. So we simply saw a large different dynamic in that crowd this year, which is relative to what we've been seeing across our community. So that's part of what we talk about here as we plan. That's part of our concern. It's part of how we deploy our resources and how we're going to deal with that. I mean, we're taking steps internally here to try to deal with that problem on our streets as far as how we attack that problem. So it's all part and parcel, and it's very concerning. I mean, the problem is, as you know, people can mull about, and you can, with officers on the ground who have a great deal of experience, can see the problem they're faced with, but that doesn't mean you right out of the gate have an option to enforce or to put a problem to rest. I mean, you can know what you're dealing with and not have a lot of enforcement ability at that time. And as we know, there's a lot of people in the community think we can call for mass arrests and we can take all kinds of very, very aggressive stances. But as you know, we work with authorities and we can only do so much with what we have. We try to deploy resources and dispel this, disperse this crowd peacefully, which is what we did this year with the resources that we have. But it's a concern. It's across the community. We're trying to deal with that as an organization beyond this year of university coming back to school and what comes with homecoming. It's across the community. So we're trying to learn more, trying to deal with that problem, and trying to put the resources in the right place to deal with it. But the end game's the same. We've got to eradicate this across the board, not just with the events attached to homecoming. So we're working hard toward that.
I can imagine that, like I said, I am in the area for the restaurant I have, and we serve some part of the Queens. It doesn't matter how prepared I am every year. I deal with the different situation, and it's not enough sources for me to deal with that type of business even just for one day. And I can imagine, your sources and your efforts and how, our force and you guys get desperate to handle that better than the last year. But I assure you and all my colleagues, is anything as a board we can do to make the next event is better and we can support, I will be willing to support that. And thank you very much for the report, and thank you for everyone to listening to me.
Thank you. If I may just add, and I know that at first blush, people might think that, I know there's been some feedback, not from you folks, but from very, very small segment of talking over policing and all of this theory. But the bottom line is, and I certainly give huge thanks to the chief for having the courage to give us the resources we needed. We had a number of outside resources in our community to police this event. They were necessary. We certainly had considerable public order resources. And of course, the chief has already reported, she'll talk with you later about the costs associated, but that comes with a huge cost to the community. But I can tell you that with all of the sections of public order, how we deployed public order, the mountain unit was invaluable there from Toronto. I think that the way they were deployed simply helped us disperse this crowd peacefully. So what we organized, what we planned for, what we deployed, I can tell you that every one of those officers and civilian staff or support staff that came with it were needed, because there were times when we had a number of things going on at different places, and having the ability to deploy large numbers to different spots. It didn't always gather in one group of 8,000 people. For example, on the second Saturday, even though they didn't gather in one group of large in the thousands, the same number of people were out and about, mulling about all across the university district. So we were effective in being able to deploy resources to take away their advantage, to gather and to cause a problem. But we wouldn't have done that without the substantial resources that the chief authorized to bring in. So we were well situated and prepared for this, and that'll be part of our future planning, just how many resources we need to get in place to deal with this. So I thank you for your comment.
Yeah, oh, thank you very much. I really appreciate all the officers who took part in this one from the Kingston and the surrounding municipalities or the other cities. I really appreciate putting your life on danger to save our. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, so I think we'll move forward. Next, there are no motions. There is no unfinished business. There is no new business. So I would like a motion to move to in camera. If I could have Jeff, Bridget, thank you. All in favor? Very good. We'll move to in camera now. Thank you.
Right away or 10 minutes?
How about 5?
5 is good. I'm just gonna grab coffee. That's it.
All right.
Lori, can you send the link again, please? Thanks.
Sure.